You wake before the sun has done anything but touch the highest sliver of sky. The darkness is not absolute, but a profound, humid indigo that seems to press against your eyelids, smelling faintly of salt and wood rot. Before you even fully sit up, your body remembers the routine. There is no alarm to break the quiet, only the subtle pull of necessary movement. You slide off the thin mat onto the packed earth floor, the coolness seeping through the woven fibers. The single lamp flickers softly nearby, its oil nearly spent, casting long, trembling shadows that stretch and shrink across the earthen walls of your small dwelling near the wharves. You move through this pre-dawn time with a careful economy of effort. Your movements are practiced, designed to create almost no sound in the still air. The primary scents are those of slumbering life, brackish water, mangrove tannins drying on wood, and the faint metallic tang of tide-washed coral left exposed at low water. You begin by collecting the things that were discarded at dusk, the empty baskets woven from palm fronds, stacked neatly beside your sleeping area. Each weave shows a small imperfection, a knot or break, and you run a thumb lightly over them, noting their resilience. These are not mere receptacles, they are tools of measurement and memory. Next, the lamps. You carry the few earthenware oil pots to their designated spots along the narrow quay edge. The oil itself is thick and yellowish, smelling richly of heated animal fat and natural resin. You cup your hands around the lamp's bases as you place them down, feeling the reassuring heft of the ceramic. The wick must be trimmed just so, not too short, lest it gutter out on a passing breeze, but not too long, which would waste the precious fuel. The air is thick with anticipation, yet utterly quiet. This silence is not an absence of sound. It is a pressurized stillness, humming with potential energy, the compressed life force of a great port awaiting its awakening. You pause at the edge of the quay, looking out over the murky expanse where the sea meets the estuary mouth. The mist hangs low, clinging to the hulls of the moored river barges like damp silk. Through this watery veil, you can just make out the vague shapes of cargo stacked high, dark bales wrapped in salt-stained canvas, polished timbers smelling of distant forests, and crates whose contents remain secret until purchased. You walk slowly along the edge where the dry earth meets the perpetually wet ground. Your bare feet register the grit underfoot, a mix of pulverized shell, dust, and river silt. It is a tactile education in patience. You observe the way the minimal light catches the water's surface, making it appear oily and reflective, mirroring the muted colors of the sky. This early hour belongs to the watchers, the planners, those whose livelihoods depend on knowing what happens before anyone else sees it. The rhythmic whisper of distant lapping water against pilings is the only consistent sound, a breath drawn by the estuary itself. You let your eyes adjust fully, absorbing the palette of grays and deep blues that dominate everything. Slowly, another life begins to stir elsewhere. A dog barks quietly, its call muffled by the mist. A solitary boatman pushes his narrow vessel away from the bank with an oiled paddle stroke, the movement causing small, concentric ripples to spread out across the water. This quiet hour demands a careful contemplation of preparation. Your livelihood hinges on more than simply selling goods. It relies on the perception of order, the assurance of reliability, and the intimate knowledge of every commodity you handle. You return to your stall area, where several woven mats cover low wooden tables. These tables are not always organized, so when the night forces a hasty closing, leaving small spills or unswept debris, you sweep the ground methodically with a shallow broom made of dried reeds, scooping up the last remnants of yesterday's activity, a stray speck of cinnamon dust, a few discarded rice husks, the faint smudge marks left by porters' heavy boots. The task is meditative. The scraping sound of the reed broom against the hard-packed earth becomes a gentle, steady beat that mimics the quiet pulse of the port itself. As you clean, your mind moves beyond the physical grit and towards the intangible requirements of tomorrow. Trust, accurate weights, clear scent profiles. You smooth down the low wooden counter where your day's transaction will take place, running your fingertips over its weathered surface, noticing the deep scoring marks left by years of goods being pushed, weighted, and measured. Each scratch tells a story of successful exchange, of difficult negotiations settled by integrity. You spend several minutes simply arranging your most important tools, the balance scales. They are crafted of beautifully aged bronze, heavy in the hand, with delicate brass weights hanging from the pans. You lift them gently, noting how the metal has darkened and polished over centuries of use. Though they have been cleaned, you test their mechanism by carefully leveling one pan and letting it rest against the other. The exquisite balance is reassuring. A slight tilt or drag reveals an imbalance that must be corrected before real commerce begins. This ritual inspection serves as both a physical preparation and a mental centering. The small sacks of raw spice materials are already waiting, burlap, stained with countless exotic powders. You check the labels, handwritten in faded ink using the local script mixed with symbols learned from foreign trade sources. Cinnamon sticks are bundled high, their fragrant curls slightly damp. Nutmeg seeds rest in shallow bowls, dry and smelling intensely sweet. Cloves are packed tightly into straw baskets, promising a deep, warm earthiness. You inhale deeply, drawing the mixed scents of these objects into your lungs. The sharp sweetness of clove mixed with the subtle floral note of nutmeg, overlaid by the pervasive mineral smell of the incoming tide. These aromas constitute your inventory. They are tangible stories sourced from distant island chains and mainland jungles, arriving to find a temporary resting place here. In Malacca, the early quiet allows you room for deep reflection on the nature of value. It is fascinating how these small objects, a few grams of deeply colored spice, can command such weight in terms of trade, reputation, and human endeavor. They represent entire supply chains, the arduous trek from the plantation, the passage across treacherous seas dodging storms, the labor of the porters who carried them inland before they ever reached this quay. As you finish sweeping, gathering your thoughts into a calm focus, you find yourself standing by the water's edge once more. The sun has not yet risen, but the sky above the eastern horizon has begun to transition from indigo to a paler, bruised mauve. This gradual brightening is less an event and more a slow revelation. You watch the few early workers beginning their own routine, a fisherman mending nets nearby, a cart laden with fresh water being slowly pulled toward the main market path. The pre-dawn air does not change its density suddenly. It merely thins, losing some of its deep, suffocating humidity as if taking a preparatory breath. You wait in this quiet moment, grounded by your small stall, connected to the rhythm of the tide and the methodical sweep of the broom. The silence remains protective, granting you time to organize not just your goods, but your own careful bearing for the day that is slowly, inexorably approaching. By the time the first wave of noisy barges arrives, you want to be settled, prepared, embodying quiet, unwavering competence. It is this foundational stillness that makes the ensuing chaos bearable and profitable. You run a damp fingertip along the edge of your bronze balance scale. The metal, even after being polished by countless hands before you, retains a cool memory of sea moisture and salt grit. You observe the patina forming in the tiny grooves where the pivot point joins the arm. It is not merely cleaning an instrument. It is reaffirming your place within the established order of commerce. The movement is deliberate, mindful of the scale's weight and balance. You check the small brass counterweights attached by fine chains. They must be perfectly solid, their density consistent, for any variance will breed suspicion among the Mandarin merchants who deal in vast quantities of goods. You carefully scrape the bottom of the coconut shell mortar with a sliver of hard wood. The interior surface is surprisingly porous, holding residual scents, the faint sweetness of last week's nutmeg dust mixed with the sharper, drier tang of cinnamon bark. As you work, your attention settles on the arrangement of goods that constitute your workspace. Labeled burlap sacks rest neatly at your feet, one designated for the fragrant, curled sticks of cinnamon, another for the smooth, dark buds of clove, and a third, smaller sack destined for whole nutmeg seeds. The aroma rising from these stacked materials is complex. The dry heat radiating up from the ground subtly warms them, releasing the inherent volatile oils. You notice how the cinnamon gives off a warm, almost spicy scent, a little bit sweet, like burning sugar, while the clove emanates something more musky and deeply earthy. This precision of arrangement speaks volumes about your reputation before you even utter a word of trade. It communicates reliability. It says that your measures are exact, your goods sorted, and your processes methodical. You pick up a small pile of dried peppercorns, noticing the slight variations in their color and size. Their papery skin catches the weak light filtering into the shed area, making them seem almost dark black against the paler canvas of your workbench. A fine brush sweeps away stray dust particles from the mortar's flat surface, gathering microscopic remnants of bygone spices. Each speck of dust is an echo of a past transaction, a ghostly trace of global exchange across the strait. The handling of these tools becomes a meditative practice. You are assessing not just their physical condition, the sharpness of your scraping blade, the clean gleam of the bronze, but also the state of the commerce they will facilitate. The quality of your measures directly reflects the perceived stability of your own livelihood, and by extension, the trustworthiness of the goods themselves. Next, you begin arranging small sample containers on a smooth plank of polished teakwood. These are not the bulk sacks, but miniature demonstrations. A measured pinch of clove dust, 3 meticulously arranged cinnamon fragments, a handful of nutmeg seeds. You handle each type with a specific sort of care, realizing that these tiny portions will answer the most critical questions from your clients. How precisely is this weighed? Is the humidity affecting the volume? Is the cure consistent across different batches? These are questions that matter more to the sophisticated buyer than any estimate of profit. They concern the integrity of the commodity itself. You must embody perfect knowledge. You gently test the weight balance on a tiny, single cinnamon stick against one of your counterweights. The connection is immediate and satisfying. The principle of equilibrium holds perfectly. This simple mechanical act is the backbone of every complex exchange that will happen over the next months. The smell here shifts slightly as you shift positions. You catch the underlying blend of Malaccan air, humid, metallic with salt spray from the nearby docks, undercut by a faint but persistent undertone of burning mangrove wood and fresh sewage runoff near the outer quay edge. You take a few slow breaths, filtering out the sharpness of the maritime grime to focus only on the dry, sweet scents, the potential wealth embodied in the spice. You notice the rhythm of others awakening nearby, the rhythmic creak of ropes being secured, the muffled calls of porters beginning their rounds, the low murmur of initial negotiations already starting deeper within the bustling core of the port. But for this moment, everything is quiet, contained by the polished routine of your stall. You continue to adjust the samples, arranging them so that the contrast between colors and textures, the deep burgundy brown of cinnamon against the creamy white of nutmeg pulp, is highly visible and inviting. It is a silent preparation for conversation, a visual index of value. Your fingers brush across the burlap sacks again. The rough weave feels grounding, solid. They will carry global desires, the sweet breath of the East, the sharp spice of the islands, all gathered into manageable commercial units. You mentally catalog the requirements for tomorrow's measurements, ensuring every unit of measure and every tool is ready to perform its function with flawless efficiency. This meticulousness is how you build a life in this world of tides and distant empires, by controlling your small corner of accuracy. The morning is just beginning to unfold, not with a sudden rush, but with the slow seepage of light across the wet planks beneath your worn sandals. You move with an economy of effort, accustomed to the rhythm dictated by the tides and the unpredictable movements of foreign goods. The previous quiet has given way, not to chaos, but to a steady, organized murmur. The gentle clink of cargo being unloaded, the rhythmic creak of water lifting against wood, the low, multi-tonal call of porters calling out their manifests. This noise is simply the breathing of Malacca in the early hours, a deep exhalation that signals commerce is about to resume its steady pulse. You feel the grit of wet sand and discarded husks clinging lightly between your toes as you navigate the narrow patch of ground allotted for your stall. It holds the ghosts of yesterday's trade, the dust of old pepper sacks, the slight stickiness left by last night's spilled resin. You pause near the stacked crates, brushing away a fine film of sediment with the toe of your sandal. This simple act of tidying becomes an unconscious affirmation. You are ready for what comes next. The first sign of incoming cargo is always announced not by sight alone, but by smell and sound. From the river mouth, carried on the slight breeze, come distinct plumes of scent. Sometimes it is the overpowering sweetness of jungle rot mixed with coconut oil. Other times, it is the sharp, metallic tang of salt spray whipped up against the hull of a returning barge. Today, the air carries a complex layering. Underneath the dominant smell of damp river silt and exhaust smoke from passing sampans, there is an emerging counterscent, a faint but unmistakable whisper of exotic dryness. You track this scent by your nose. It smells like cinnamon bark that has dried too long in the sun, mingled with the sweet, woody perfume of fresh nutmeg. This fragrant signature is the promise of profit, and you turn your attention toward the main thoroughfare where the barges are docking. The river traffic begins slowly, a steady procession rather than a sudden flood. The first barge to come into sight belongs to Sumatra, its hull stained dark by years of tropical tides. As it docks, the rhythm shifts immediately. Workers move with practiced efficiency, their movements economical and low to the ground. You observe how they manage the sacks, the careful stacking that minimizes wasted space, the ropes tied in efficient knots. These people are skilled not just at lifting weight, but at handling commodity value. Every knot and placement speaks of cost and habit. Your role is to integrate these newly arrived stacks into your own inventory structure, a task requiring disciplined thought about volume and compatibility. As the first wave of goods is offloaded, you move toward the makeshift grouping where the incoming cargoes are temporarily placed. You begin conceptually organizing what arrives. The rough sacks of local rice from the mainland are stacked near one end. Next to them, piles of small, more valuable items, the dark, plump seeds of peppercorns, the curled lengths of dried root, the smooth pods of cloves, are gathered in a separate area suitable for delicate handling. This physical segregation is not merely organizational, It is a quiet declaration of your expertise. You understand the inherent difference between bulk foodstuffs and highly prized spices. Then come the porters and officials. The Siamese men move with a distinct, quick energy, their voices pitched low but carrying an authority that demands attention. They are negotiating already, pointing at specific piles of goods while gesturing complex measurements in the air. Nearby, groups of Chinese mandarins gather, clad in deep robes that seem resistant to the humidity. Their communication is more deliberate, punctuated by nods and measured tones. You listen closely, not for single words which you may not grasp fully, but for the underlying cadence of transaction, the specific pitch used when discussing quality versus mere quantity. This nuanced listening is a skill honed over years in Malacca's diverse port life. You realize that merely receiving the goods is only half the process. Understanding who brought them and why they arrived at this specific moment is crucial. You watch as a young man carrying heavy bundles of fragrant bark approaches your stall, pausing to breathe deeply before speaking to you in quick, heavily accented Malay. He points to several sacks labeled with symbols that denote cloves from Ternate, a faraway archipelago known for its reliable supply, but also its volatile pricing. Before responding, you allow yourself a moment simply to absorb the scent rising off those arriving goods. The fresh wave of spice is stronger, richer than the earlier barges had carried. It is an invigorating smell, telling you which trade routes are currently fruitful. When dealing with these incoming shipments, time becomes a slow-motion process of methodical sorting and preliminary assessment. You do not trust a commodity simply because it arrived on a barge. Your hands perform a silent, expert inspection. For the nutmeg, you would gently pull a few seeds from a sack, examining them under the filtered light that filters through the canopy above the quay. Are they modeled correctly? Do they possess the faint sweetness characteristic of optimal maturation? If they seem dull or overly damp, your reputation is instantly at risk. Similarly, with the cinnamon, you check for splits in the bark, a sign of poor drying or rough handling, and for consistency in color. Each flaw, each minute impurity, speaks volumes about its journey and affects its worth here. The repetitive nature of this checking becomes a form of meditation. Your mind is not racing ahead to profit margins, but existing entirely within the texture and scent of the immediate objects. You feel the dry, brittle snap of a cinnamon twig between your fingers. You notice the slight, oily sheen on a perfect clove bud. You smell the earthy dust mixed with the sharp perfume of cloves. This intense focus grounds you in the reality that value here is built upon sensory perfection. As midday draws nearer, and the main flow of barges slows, the immediate rush gives way to smaller, more targeted streams of people. Individual porters, small buying groups, officials making final counts. These transactions are often less dramatic, but demand equal precision. Perhaps an Arab captain arrives on a sloop, needing to verify a certain weight of pepper that was meant for passage to the Red Sea. He does not argue. He simply stares at your bronze scales, waiting for the confirmation of accuracy, a silence that speaks louder than any shouted price negotiation. You acknowledge his presence with a slight nod and begin the routine of preparation, pulling out one of the carefully weighted, standardized sample bags used solely for calibration checks. You are reminded that your expertise is not just in selling, it is in validation. You serve as an arbiter of quality. The reliability of your scales, the integrity of your samples, becomes the cornerstone of Malacca's reputation among global traders. This deep-seated role means that when you clean the scale pans or polish a counterweight, you are not just caring for metal, you are tending to trust itself. The rhythm slows again as the sun climbs higher, turning the humid air into something thick and palpable, pressing down upon the stacked cargo and the people who move among it. The scent shifts too, mixing the dry notes of cinnamon with the unavoidable undercurrents of human activity. Sweat, damp cloth, the faint but persistent smell of untreated wastewater running off the nearby drains. This olfactory composite is simply the lifeblood of a thriving port, a constant blend that you have learned to accept as background harmony. You sit back slightly against your crates, letting the scents wash over you, accepting them as part of the daily measure of time and trade. You sit before the mortars and pestles, the cool weight of the stone familiar in your hands. The initial flurry of morning activity has settled slightly, allowing you a space to focus solely on the craft itself. There is no rush here. The true art of trade resides not in the quick counting of coins or the shouted names of foreign goods, but in the quiet chemistry of assessment. You begin by gathering small samples, selecting a cluster of cloves from a woven mat, and scattering them upon your polished work surface. The scent rises immediately, an intense, warm sweetness mixed with something dry and medicinal. You examine each clove bud one by one, tipping it slightly into the soft light filtering through the canvas awnings above. You are looking for uniformity, for the promise of consistent flavor that justifies a merchant's reputation across vast, risky ocean crossings. Some buds feel plump, their papery skin taut and richly colored. Others seem marginally shriveled at the edges, suggesting an uneven harvest or perhaps too much time spent under the tropical sun. You gently rub your thumb across the sepals, noting the slight grit that has settled there, a testament to handling and travel. This intimate inspection is not merely quality control, it is a quiet assertion of your knowledge. The process continues with nutmeg. The small seeds are gathered into a shallow tray, their weight negligible until you begin to feel the combined density in your palms. You pick up one seed, turning it over slowly. Its skin is hard and oily, almost waxy, and carries the distinctive musky perfume that clings lightly to the surrounding air. Unlike the volatile sweetness of cloves, nutmeg possesses a deeper, more enduring aroma, an earthy quality that speaks of long time spent drying in shade. You tap the seeds gently against your knuckles, listening for the solid, dull thunk that signifies good, uncracked maturity. Next are the cinnamon sticks, gathered from their tightly woven bundles. These segments, once dried and cured, retain a gentle curvature, like miniature scrolls of fragrant bark. You run your fingers along the length of a promising stick. You note the fine dust of aged wood mixed with resinous oil. Cinnamon is easily counterfeited, therefore, assessing its true depth of flavor. That balance between sweet warmth and sharp spice requires patience. You break off a small sliver, allowing the exposed inner fibers to catch the light for a moment before releasing their faint, pungent scent into the humid air. The physical rhythm becomes methodical. Scoop, inspect, compare, smell. It is an exercise in focused attention that keeps your mind anchored firmly in the present moment of exchange and quality. You reach for the mortar shell meant for blending, which is made of dark, pitted stone. The surface shows signs of countless previous uses, of turmeric's sharp bite, pepper's immediate heat, and cardamon's cool perfume, a patina of accumulated commerce. You take a small pile of powdered resins, perhaps local Malaccan sap mixed with bark dust from Sumatra. You add a few drops of fragrant liquid, maybe a highly prized resin gathered near the coastal mangroves, to another handful of cinnamon powder. The blend is not meant to be consumed yet, but sampled. It is an understanding of how disparate scents interact when combined. When you gently mix them with a pestle, the powders do not simply combine. they seem to coalesce, creating a new scent profile entirely, richer and more complex than its parts. The act of blending resins taught you that spice itself is often merely the binder for other things, a vehicle for local knowledge or unique floral notes. Your blend develops a warm complexity, a gentle undertone that speaks of jungle humidity meeting refined trade goods. This subtle creation mirrors the function of your own stall, to combine raw materials from distant corners into a single, valuable experience for the paying buyer. You move away from pure inspection toward the mechanical ritual of weighing. The bronze scales are cleaned again with soft chamois leather, wiping away any remaining dust or foreign residue. You arrange small piles, a set measure of cloves, an equal weight of peppercorns, a standardized amount of powdered nutmeg. When you place the first pile into the balance pan, adjusting the counterbalance until perfect equilibrium is achieved, there is a profound sense of stillness. The scales respond with absolute certainty. They do not deceive or complain. This reliability is what underpins everything in your life. The weight itself becomes a language. A difference of half a measure on the tiny hook might mean the difference between profit and loss for a man navigating the volatile markets of Canton, or the hunger pangs of a porter waiting for passage. You adjust the counterweight ever so slightly, listening to the subtle click that signals perfect balance. This precision is not merely technical skill. It is a daily, meditative commitment to truth in commerce. The knowledge accumulates in you like sediment at the bottom of an ancient pot, layered and deepening with every successful day. You realize how much of your life has been built on understanding these tiny weights. That reputation is simply weighted trust, calculated grain by careful grain across continents. The smell of the perfect mix of resin and spice momentarily overwhelms the usual blend of fish brine and wet wood. It is a quiet, potent signature of Malacca, a perfume made from meticulous hands and deep knowledge. You pause, drawing a slow breath that feels cool in your lungs, even under the warm jungle canopy. You observe the slow passage of light, watching how the golden sunlight catches the dust motes dancing between the spices in the air. The entire stall seems imbued with these fragrant particles. This is the rhythm you understand best. That profound value requires intense, sustained focus on something small and beautiful, whether it is a clove bud or a simple balance beam. The process of weighing continues through several rotations. Cloves against nutmeg, resin blends against pure cinnamon. You find a certain satisfaction in the repetition itself. It calms the mind and deepens the awareness of proportion. Every weight cast, every scent analyzed, reinforces your standing among the city's countless mercantile operators. Later, as the mid-morning buyers begin to filter through, you maintain this steady, deliberate pace. You do not rush the process for anyone. The initial transaction might be fast and brusque, but it cannot bypass the ritual of assessment. Whether dealing with a foreign captain or a local agent, your hands guide the goods into inspection, forcing a moment of shared concentration that speaks volumes before any words are exchanged. You allow them to observe your methodical movements, the gentle scoop, the slow turn of the pestle, the final, confident adjustment of the bronze scale. This quiet display is often more persuasive than any orator's flourish, confirming your mastery over the basic laws of exchange. The midday sun climbs high above the straits of Malacca, filtering through the dense canopy and dappling patterns across the cobbled quay. The earlier mist has vanished, replaced by a shimmering heat that seems to vibrate off the water and the stacked crates. You find yourself settled behind your low stall, a small patch of meticulously organized space amidst the surging tide of humanity and cargo. The noise level is immense, a layered soundscape composed of barking dockworkers, the rhythmic creak of timbers under heavy weight, the persistent calls of vendors advertising woven mats or fresh jungle produce, and the multilingual hum of negotiation that never seems to truly resolve itself. You stand quietly, allowing your senses to adapt to this concentrated rush of cross-cultural activity. Your reputation, built through the slow precision of mornings past, is what anchors you here now, a steady point amidst the constant flow. The heat begins to settle deep into the grit between your toes as you shift your weight slightly. You subtly adjust a stack of woven baskets beside your stall. Among them sit small samples, dried pieces of rich cinnamon bark, perfect knots of nutmeg dust preserved in muslin, and vibrant pods of clove, each color telling a tale of its distant island origin. These are not merely goods, they are accumulated knowledge, carried across unimaginable distances by ships and hands. The movement around you is relentless, yet somehow ordered. Here comes an Indian merchant, his robes brilliant against the muted browns and greens of the port. He moves with a confidence that speaks of generations spent mastering this very chaos. His eyes scan your samples quickly, registering their freshness before settling on the weights of the brass scales. You do not need to speak any common tongue. The silent exchange, the assessment of quality through glance and gesture, is enough. You pick up a piece of cinnamon, turning it slowly in your fingers. The air around it smells complex, sharp sweetness mixed with something dry, almost woody like old leather left out in the tropics. You notice how the local humidity seems to soften the edges of everything here, making rough surfaces feel smooth over time. The polished wood of the stall counter, the oil sheen on wet cobblestones. A Portuguese sailor approaches next, his skin weathered by salt and sun, his clothes bearing the faint streaks of tropical dust. He speaks in a harsh, accented tongue, gesturing toward a large, sealed box marked with symbols you vaguely recognize as from Batavia. You do not fully grasp the language, but you understand the underlying current. Inquiry about quantity, quality, and price fluctuation. You repeat simple gestures and measured nods, guiding his gaze back to your organized samples. The process is one of subtle triangulation. Each buyer brings their own complex needs. Some want pure scent for incense ritual. Others require flavor agents for local cuisine. Still others are merely interested in the bulk value of a shipment passing through. You must mentally categorize them all, adjusting your perceived value based on their ultimate destination and intended use. It requires not only market knowledge, but a deep understanding of human habit. You carefully move toward a grouping of crates arrived from Sumatra. These hold cloves, freshly collected and still holding the faint, heady perfume of wet earth mixed with spice. You feel the weight difference between the fresh harvest and the dried reserve. One smells intensely vital, almost sharp, while the other is mellowed by time and storage. It is this subtle variation that defines your skill. The heat forces a slower pace upon everyone. The conversations become punctuated by necessary pauses, a moment to draw breath, a hand placed on the cooling metal of a barrel for support. You observe the resilience in people's movements, the steady dip of a porter's back carrying sacks, the deliberate shuffle of feet across slippery stone. It is here that the cross-cultural exchange truly unfolds. Watching an Arab captain haggle with a Chinese mandarin over the precise measurement of nutmeg dust is like observing two separate rivers meeting and braiding together their currents into a shared flow. They speak different dialects, wear vastly different fabrics, the gold-embroidered robes of one, the practical linen of another, yet they are united by the universal necessity of commerce. Their conflict or agreement hinges entirely on your ability to be the neutral ground, the trusted arbiter who knows the intrinsic worth of the spice regardless of the flag flying above their heads. You spend a few minutes near the edge of your stall, letting your eyes drift over the various containers. Burlap sacks, sealed wooden chests, woven baskets. Each object represents a journey that defied distance and time. A clove grown in remote Indonesia, an Arabian resin traded across the Red Sea, Indonesian cinnamon arriving by monsoon winds. These goods are conduits for culture itself. As the sun reaches its zenith, casting harsh, unforgiving light, you realize the profound weight of your small existence here. You do not command warships or negotiate royal treaties. Yet, everything that passes through this single stall, the wealth, the status, the very breath of the empire, depends on the consistent integrity of your scales and the reliable knowledge in your head. This recognition settles over you with a quiet patience. You simply continue to breathe in the complex tapestry of scents. Salt mixed with sweat, burning tropical wood, overwhelming sweetness from the opened nutmeg shells, and always, beneath it all, the faint, metallic tang of the straits themselves. The flow of people does not cease. Another buyer approaches, more reserved than the last, perhaps a junior official or a scholar tasked with acquiring medicinal herbs. His inquiries are quieter, focusing on potency rather than sheer volume. You feel the weight change from material value to intangible knowledge. You must now speak less of price and more of provenance. You guide his attention to specific leaf cuttings, telling him softly, almost ritually, how they were harvested, when the moon was new, when the wind was just right. This act turns a simple transaction into an educational exchange about natural rhythm and deep respect for the source. The ritual continues, slowly moving you through the afternoon's humid tapestry of trade, grounded by the steady presence of your carefully weighed samples. The midday sun beats down upon the wharves, casting sharp, bright squares of light onto the packed earth. It is a noise that feels constant, a high hum built from shouting in dozens of languages and the rhythmic creaking of hauling ropes. You remain rooted near your stall, surrounded by the organized chaos of aromatic goods. The heat smells different than the pre-dawn dampness. It carries dust mixed with sweat and the cloying sweetness of spilled fruit juices. Your attention is not focused on a single transaction, but on the subtle texture of the market's rhythm itself, like noting the shifting pattern in wet sand. You observe how men from various lands navigate this space. There are porters carrying bales wrapped in stiff canvas, their feet slipping slightly on the grit. You notice the difference in gait between a Siamese laborer and a Chinese merchant. One moves with practiced muscular ease, the other with a precise, contained urgency. Your role here is less about moving goods physically, and more about managing the complex geometry of human intent. To understand what is needed, you must first listen to how people speak, or rather, how they pause. Today, the atmosphere carries an underlying tension, not related to spices or cost, but to meaning. A minor misunderstanding has occurred nearby, concerning a stack of raw cinnamon bark and its stated weight at customs tariff. The air around this small cluster of men thickens immediately. Gestures become sharper. Voices rise in pitches designed to convey authority. You do not intervene directly, yet your deep knowledge of the exchange acts as an invisible anchor. The dispute is about measurement, a matter that seems simple, a discrepancy of a handful of grams, but which threatens to unravel larger agreements built on trust. It involves a captain speaking in clipped Portuguese rhythms and a mainland official insisting on a reading written in Mandarin characters. The languages clash like poorly struck metal. You wait for the cresting wave of agitation to pass. Your focus drifts past the heated exchange, cataloging the scents: raw clove buds, dry nutmeg oil, the musky smell of damp jungle wood carried by one passing breeze. These deep, unchanging aromas serve as a grounding contrast to the immediate flare-up of temper and language. You recall that much of high commerce in this corner of the world has always been managed not by decree or sheer force, but by shared respect, a mutual recognition of professional competence. Speaking only flawless Mandarin or Portuguese would be futile. What is needed is a return to foundation. The captain gestures sharply at the official's ledger, his frustration clear. The official replies in a tone that implies superior knowledge of law, regardless of the actual substance of the dispute. Your mind quietly processes this clash of civilizations and customs. You remember phrases, simple salutations learned from years of overhearing scholarly discussions or minor diplomatic exchanges. Perhaps a simple greeting derived from Sanskrit acknowledging mutual good fortune, or maybe an early Malay phrase that simply asks for patience. When you finally step slightly closer, your movement is minimal, almost imperceptible to those involved. You do not repeat the core dispute, nor do you take sides with either party's stated legal position. Instead, you offer a gentle linguistic counterpoint. Perhaps simply repeating an opening phrase in an academic style of Malay, a language understood by many who consider themselves learned. That acknowledges the difficulty of the subject matter, while subtly redirecting attention from accusation back to process. You are gently reminding them that their shared goal is the spice, and the spice requires a mutual understanding. The exchange, previously charged with professional antagonism, falters. The sharp edges of anger soften slightly, replaced by mild embarrassment at having been so loud, so difficult. The captain's posture straightens marginally. The official pauses mid-sentence, looking toward you for confirmation or further direction. You simply let a moment stretch, letting the unfamiliar, calming rhythm of a historically specific greeting fill the sudden silence. You then turn your attention back to the quality assessment of the cinnamon bark that is central to the dispute. You do not talk about law or tariffs. Instead, you carefully take a small piece of the disputed sample and place it on your polished brass scale. You lift the scales just enough so that all parties can see the smooth arc of the metal, focusing their attention entirely onto the tangible weight and color of the commodity itself. This act pulls them back from the abstract debate over rights, grounding them in the concrete reality of trade. They begin to talk again, but this time the tone is collaborative, moving from who's right to how do we best assess. The dispute does not vanish, but it retreats into a measurable, manageable process. This negotiation relies on knowing that every civilization passing through Malacca has one constant need: verifiable quality and fair measure. Your ability to mediate this communication breakdown, to acknowledge the linguistic differences while reinforcing the universally understood ritual of assessment, reinforces your own quiet authority. It is an educational performance in subtle human rhythm. Later, as the peak intensity of the exchange subsides, you take a moment to simply observe the logistics of the port from the shade near your stall. The sheer volume of activity washes over you: the shouts, the clatter of pottery, the uneven squeak of cart wheels on stones. It is overwhelming but predictable. You mentally map the current state of the flow, which boats are leaving, what cargo types seem most desirable to passing captains, and where the market seems to be diverting its attention for the coming hours. The language you speak in your mind becomes one of movement and pattern. The monsoon winds arriving from specific seasonal quadrants influence trade routes months before any ship sails. You correlate the current local activity with these grander patterns. Are the ships departing now heading toward the Indian coast, which requires nutmeg most urgently? Or are they being loaded for the southern Chinese markets, where cinnamon often holds more weight? This internal mapping of complex flow, connecting the immediate shout to the distant season and trade pattern, is your deepest expertise. It is knowledge that requires deep historical understanding, far beyond simply knowing the price of a clove bud. You feel the quiet power that comes from seeing these intricate threads woven together. The small moment of linguistic confusion today predicting the profitability of a major voyage across the straits next month. Your entire existence here, in this humidity and noise, is a careful dance between observation and subtle guidance, reminding everyone, and yourself, that true wealth lies not just in the spices, but in the understanding of the world's inherent rhythms. The heat has settled over the harbor now, a thick blanket woven from sun-baked wood and distant jungle humidity. The peak frantic energy of the midday market is receding, giving way to that deep, languid lull characteristic of a tropical afternoon. You do not feel the need to rush. The pace of Malacca at this time belongs to those who understand patience as currency. Your focus shifts subtly away from the immediate row of weighed goods and toward the peripheral signs of the port's breathing body. Near your stall, where stacked crates await collection, you observe the tide. It is not a dramatic spectacle, but a slow, predictable retreat and return that dictates every movement here. You notice how the grit-covered stone floor, usually obscured by people's sandals and spilled cargo, begins to gleam as the waterline creeps back across the quay's edge. This quiet study of the water provides its first lesson today, that even great forces move with an inescapable rhythm. You allow your gaze to drift toward the waterfront markers, where port officials keep their records. These are not tales of naval victories or treaties signed in silk ink. Rather, they are charts and scrawled notes detailing the predictable movements of the heavens above the straits. You peer at a section of salvaged driftwood, which serves as a makeshift meteorological station. A combination of knotted ropes, carved wooden devices, and stacks of dried palm leaves meticulously arranged by date and observation. Most people passing by regard this area with careless indifference, focusing only on their goods or their destination. But you remember that commerce here is dictated not by the will of men, but by the temperamental kindness of wind and season. The air carries a scent profile that has become deeply familiar to your profession. The sweet, heavy musk of fermenting fruit from nearby stalls mixes with the clean, sharp tang of salt spray. Layered beneath these competing aromas is the unmistakable smell of humanity, a composite of coconut oil, sweat dried by tropical heat, and the faint, persistent odor of river mud carried by the occasional boat. It is a complex scent map that speaks to every major civilization that has ever relied on this spot. Your attention fixes on a group of local men who are examining charts etched onto treated leather, the port's predictions for the coming months. They speak in low, guttural bursts of Malay and Sundanese, their voices seeming muffled by the dense midday air. You do not need to understand every word. You only need to read the gestures, the pointing toward certain quadrants, the tracing of an arc across a section marked with a dried bird feather. These men are poring over the seasonal pattern, the reliable arrival and departure of the monsoons that form the spine of all trade in this region. It is here, amidst their hushed deliberation, that your own trained senses take over. You observe something subtle in the pattern of a group of passing seabirds, perhaps egrets or tropic birds, that cuts across the expanse of water visible through the gaps between the moored vessels. They do not fly in random drifts. There is a discernible pattern to their flight path. A sudden, gentle lift that favors the southwest horizon suggests a current shift, slight but significant, that will affect how the shallow draft barges navigate tomorrow morning. The understanding of these natural indicators, the bird's height, the slant of the afternoon sun casting unusually sharp shadows across the wet docks, the specific color gradient in the northern sky when the haze briefly thins, is far more valuable to a merchant than any knowledge of foreign coinage or complex law. It is predictive science lived into routine. You take a slow breath, drawing deeply enough that you can taste the mineral quality of the salt mixed with the spices. This process of observation, this gentle waiting for the right moment when the winds change and the tides cooperate, is the deepest labor of your trade. You contemplate how much wealth, how many lifetimes of careful planning, rests on a few weeks of optimal seasonal weather. A small breeze, barely more than a whisper passing through the open stalls, carries with it a distinct fragrance. Not simply salt, but the sharper, woody aroma of teak and other shipbuilding timber that has been slowly drying in the heat. You feel your own posture shift imperceptibly, aligning your internal clock to this atmospheric signal. The winds are doing what they must. You merely need to correctly read their passing signs. You find yourself considering the difference between knowledge and certainty. Knowing where a spice grows is one thing. Knowing when it will arrive here, and in what condition, requires nothing less than an intuitive communion with nature's great cycles. This connection, the understanding of the monsoonal calendar, is your most vital asset, far exceeding the count of cinnamon sticks or cloves you carry. It allows you to build a reputation based not just on the quality of your goods, but on the reliability of your presence and prediction. You walk slowly away from the primary stall area, deliberately moving toward the cooler shade provided by the overhang of a warehouse structure built high enough to give a view over the immediate docks. The tiled floor beneath your sandals is cool and slightly damp, offering temporary relief from the heat that seems trapped in the close market air. You rest your hand briefly against the rough stone wall, allowing its coolness to seep into your palm. It reminds you of permanence. The stones endure whether the winds are favorable or dire. The port life around you continues with its own quiet persistence. A potter unloads a heavy basket of newly fired clay. A fisherman mends nets that snap wetly when stretched taut. These simple, necessary tasks proceed regardless of fortune or flow. They are governed by the immediate rhythm of muscle and habit. You observe this steady background hum, finding it comforting in its predictability. The weight of all global commerce, the dreams and necessities of dozens of continents, is processed through this small stretch of stone and wood. Your role is not merely that of a seller. You are an intermediary with the forces of nature itself. The spices are only vessels. The true trade commodity is the prediction, read from the sky and whispered by the tide's breath. You return to your stall, taking up a small piece of charcoal and a scrap of oiled paper, a personal charting tool, distinct from the official port charts. You begin sketching the perceived direction of the light shift, translating the fleeting observation into a permanent marker of professional recall. The cyclical nature of your life here is deeply intertwined with the vast, impersonal cycles of the earth, demanding both immense vigilance and deep, patient stillness. The heat, when it finally arrived, was not a sudden shock, but a slow, thick blanket that settled over the quayside. It carried the weight of the midday sun beating down through the humid tropical air. You pull your woven mat slightly closer to the cool stone wall of the warehouse, finding a patch of ground where the shade lingers longest. The cacophony of commerce, so vibrant and necessary just an hour ago, settles into a slightly slower, more predictable hum. This is the rhythm of waiting, the deep breathing in between transactions. Before sitting, you allow your eyes to adjust from the dazzling glare reflecting off stacked crates and brightly colored silks. You take a few slow steps back, allowing yourself to observe the edges of the market. The smell has shifted now. The sharp sting of salt and sewage that define the early morning hours is overlaid by a sweeter, more complex scent, a blend of sweat drying quickly on coarse cotton garments, roasting coconut meat, and the pungent sweetness of ripe jungle fruit. It is the unique aroma of intense life lived closely together. You walk slowly toward a small food stall tucked into a narrow alleyway off the main thoroughfare. Smoke rises from charcoal braziers nearby, mingling with the steam rising gently from cooking pots. You watch the stall owner's hands, calloused and practiced, as he prepares your meal. The selection is simple, a mound of steamed rice, served alongside freshly caught small fish wrapped in banana leaves, and a generous portion of tropical fruit whose colors you recognize instantly. These elements are staples, essential nourishment built for strong labor. The act of sitting down becomes its own kind of pause. You settle onto the low wooden bench, arranging your simple woven bowl and plate before you. Taking a moment to feel the solid wood beneath your weight grounds you in this specific spot, at this particular time. The subtle scratch of straw or grit underfoot is a reminder that even rest happens on hard ground. As you begin to eat, slowly savoring the flavors, the salty tang of the fish against the gentle starchiness of the rice, cut through by the bright sweetness of mango or plantain, your attention naturally drifts outward. The meal encourages quiet observation, turning simple sustenance into a contemplative ritual. You watch not with the urgency of a merchant calculating profit, but with the detached curiosity of someone simply existing within the flow of life. A small boy, no older than 7, darts past your feet, kicking at dust and stray bits of seaweed that have been pulled back by the tide's receding edge. His laughter is high and careless, echoing briefly against the solid walls of the port architecture. You observe his movements, the rapid change of direction, the way he seems to navigate the uneven ground with ingrained grace. He represents a continuous flow of life, unaffected by the value of cloves or the weight of gold. Near your bench, several porters are clustered in small groups, taking respite against massive stacks of empty wooden shipping crates. They do not appear to be resting entirely. There is always a subtle tension to their posture, a readiness for labor, even in stillness. You notice the patterned way they lean against the wood, shoulders relaxed but arms poised. Their clothing, though dusty and worn, suggests lives rooted here, connected deeply to the cyclical beat of the port. Your gaze travels beyond these immediate figures, further into the deeper passages where more trading happens. Here, you see an elderly Siamese man sitting cross-legged on a woven rug. He is not talking. He is merely watching the activity, his eyes possessing a slow, deep quality. His presence does not demand attention, but absorbs it quietly. You observe how even moments of rest here are part of the commerce, the exchange of energy and observation. You notice tiny details, a shard of colored pottery caught in the gutter grit, the way the midday sun catches the oily slick on a discarded piece of net, the specific manner in which water drips rhythmically from an overhanging awning, providing a counterpoint to the constant human murmur. These elements give the port its distinct texture. The simple act of eating forces your internal clock to slow down, smoothing out the sharp edges of negotiation and calculation. It is a necessary pause that allows your professional mind to recalibrate. You are reminding yourself that even amidst global trade, life continues in these quiet, unmonetized moments. Children playing, men resting, nature performing its endless cycles. Sometimes, in this calm period, you think about the knowledge itself, the accumulated understanding of tropical seasons, human negotiation tactics, and the precise chemical difference between a wild nutmeg seed and one carefully cultivated. This knowledge is your true currency. It allows you to observe without participating, merely recording the rhythms of the place. You finish the last piece of fruit. The slight stickiness of the mango juice on your fingers feels foreign compared to the grit under your fingernails. You stand up slowly, feeling the warmth and weight in your limbs from hours spent moving among stalls and crates. The afternoon heat has intensified, pressing down like a humid shawl. Despite the rest, the flow is not stopping. You gather your few personal items, your small ledger book, your polished bronze weights, and prepare to rejoin the stream of life. This period of quiet observation was necessary. It allowed you to observe how human nature persists outside the structured ritual of a transaction, preparing you to better assess the value and rhythm of the people when the serious business of trade recommences later in the day. You walk slowly back towards your stall, feeling refreshed not by sleep, but by the simple, steady passage of time. The bright heat of the day begins its slow, inevitable decline. You feel the shift in the air first, a subtle cooling that carries with it the sharp tang of the coming dusk, mixed now with cooler smells from the receding tide and damp river mud. The frantic energy that powered the quayside during the midday hours seems to soften, draining away like spilled pigment under an unseen hand. Now is the time for calculation. The transactions of heat and immediate need are done. You slowly gather yourself, your body adjusting back into the rhythm of quiet industry. You approach your small writing surface near the corner of your stall. It is not a grand desk, but a sturdy plank of local hardwood that has known countless spices and hands before you. Running your fingers over its polished grain, you notice faint etchings, the ghost marks of previous merchants, perhaps trade routes traced in permanent ink, or simple tally marks worn smooth by salt spray and time. These marks are silent witnesses to the relentless flow of humanity. The air now carries distinct layering. Beneath the lingering musk of sweat and exotic spice, oil is a new scent, the smoky sweetness of charcoal fires being lit further down the wharf, mixed with the brine that always rises from the deeper channel when the current shifts. You pause briefly, taking several deep breaths to fully inhabit this blended atmosphere, allowing the complexity of Malacca's life to fill your lungs. Your attention moves to the ledger and the ink pot. The ledger itself is thick, bound in weathered leather that smells faintly of tannins and time. Opening it requires a practiced movement, careful not to crease the brittle pages too deeply. Before you sits an array of smooth reeds dipped into dark, freshly prepared ink. Writing here is more than just recording numbers. It is crafting memory, a precise act of acknowledging every interaction, every small exchange of trust that has built your meager wealth. You begin by reviewing the day's records. You do not simply copy transactions. You verify them against the subtle signs, the remembered gestures of the Indian captain regarding the quality of cinnamon, the particular weight estimate provided by the Chinese clerk for nutmeg, the precise amount tallied from a quick exchange with the Siamese porters. This cross-referencing is an internal process, meditative and slow. Lying next to the ledger are small, labeled samples, miniature stacks of cloves, fragrant like dried earth and old wood, tiny mounds of golden cinnamon powder, the hard, mottled shells of nutmeg. You pick up a clove bud, turning it carefully in your fingers. Its texture is dry, papery, yet resilient. You close your eyes for a moment and inhale deeply, separating the specific scent of that single piece from the general overwhelming perfume of the port, the sweetness always fighting the underlying saltiness. These objects hold narrative weight. They have traveled thousands of miles across ocean swells, passed through hands you will never see again, and yet they rest here, accounted for in your careful ink strokes. You realize that the true value of this single clove bud is not measured by its spice content or even its rarity, but by the accumulated reputation it represents. The reputation of Malacca as a reliable, predictable hub where such small things can be exchanged for enormous sums. The act of calculation itself becomes calming. Your quill moves over the paper with a steady, almost ritualistic grace. You balance copper coin, weights against bales of cargo equivalents, moving from physical weight to abstract value. It is a constant intellectual exercise that requires you to maintain a level of impartial detachment, even when dealing with goods steeped in high emotion or intense desire. The numbers are simply coordinates on the vast map of human ambition. You gently rest your hand on the scales, which have done their duty all day. They gleam faintly under the low lantern light, now stationary and silent. You notice that while they were busy through the day, catching the dust motes kicked up by crossing feet, right now, only quiet settles upon them, the perfect stillness needed for honest reflection. The negotiation, when you think of it tonight, is rarely about shouting or dramatic haggling. It happens in the subtle pauses. In the moment a buyer meets your eye and nods once, confirming understanding. In the minute pause before handing over coinage, which confirms acceptance of the written record. These are complex social contracts performed through quiet dignity. You straighten a stack of burlap sacks that held coriander seeds earlier today. The heavy weave of the sack material is rough against your fingertips, smelling faintly of dust and tropical sun. You feel the weight of this commerce. It does not rest in the spices themselves, but in the knowledge you hold. Knowing which spice demands what kind of respect, knowing how to estimate a coming monsoon, knowing when a merchant is trustworthy. The low lights across the wharf begin to illuminate other merchants setting up for the night. Some are already packing away completely, their goods stacked and protected under tarps. Others are still arranging minor displays, perhaps hoping to catch one last late buyer in the dwindling light. You observe this pattern of winding down with a steady patience. There is no rush. Nature dictates the pace. To try and hurry would be poor practice for any serious merchant. As you finish signing off the final entry for the evening, securing your day's profitable narrative onto the ledger, you look out across the darkening straits. The sky above Malacca is a deepening wash of indigo and rose, a dramatic contrast to the small, controlled light sources on the wharf. You feel the weight of the spices in your stall, a tangible history, stacked high, waiting patiently for the next dawn's current to carry them onward. It is this sense of permanence, amidst constant global flux, that grounds you into the rhythm of Malacca's life. The sun has begun its slow descent over the straits, casting a deep, bruise-purple wash across the water that laps against the wooden pilings. You do not rush to follow it. Instead, you walk slowly away from the main quay, moving into the quieter, more winding market streets that narrow off from the port's edge. The frantic energy of the day has already begun its predictable subsidence. Where there was a dense tide of hurried feet minutes ago, now only scattered figures move with purpose. The cleaning crews, the late porters carrying empty baskets, the occasional solitary lantern bearer. A wave of unfamiliar scents washes over you as you turn onto these side paths. It is a complex miasma, nothing singular enough to name easily, but entirely characteristic of this deep-water port town at dusk. The sharp sweetness of spices left open by lingering vendors mixes immediately with something darker and cooler. The wet scent of overturned buckets of fish guts, the faint, metallic tang of cooling charcoal smoke from distant kitchens, and under it all, the ever-present, earthy musk of damp jungle soil meeting salt water. These smells are the perfume of a port that has lived through centuries of trade. You slow your pace, letting the scents wash over you like an environmental history lesson. You notice how the scent profiles shift depending on which alley you pass. Near a small workshop entrance, the smell is dominated by cured leather and spilled lamp oil. Around a deeper corner, near the waste channels that run alongside the cobbled walkways, the odor is heavier, more organic, the sharp decay of wood soaked in brine. You reach the central thoroughfare again, moving with an unhurried rhythm now that the major trading currents have diminished. You begin your systematic walk, eyes observing everything at a low level, puddles reflecting the growing orange glow of the sky, the deep stains on the worn paving stones where countless boots and cart wheels have passed over time, the way the humid air seems to thicken and slow every movement. You pause by the last few spice stalls still alight. A vendor, perhaps selling dried roots or resin, is slowly packing his wares into wicker baskets. You observe the methodical patience of his movements, noting that even in the decline of the day's commerce, efficiency remains paramount. The process feels less like work and more like a ritualistic gathering, an inventory check against the inevitable demands of morning. Your focus shifts to your own stall, which now seems vastly diminished compared to its midday peak. Burlap sacks, which this morning had been heaped high with rich, earthy cargo, are settling into orderly piles. You methodically begin the process of securing what remains. You check each crate and every stack of spices that were not sold, the unmixed batch of nutmeg seeds, the tightly bound rolls of cinnamon bark, a few precious handfuls of clove buds still awaiting cataloging. Kneeling slightly amongst your own inventory, you run a practiced hand over the rough texture of a burlap sack. The material is thick and resists mildew from the ground-level dampness. You notice faint traces of grit mixed with fine spice dust, some nutmeg dust clinging to the threads, others flecks of dried, dark clove petal adhering near the seams. These tiny residues tell a story, an unsung chronicle of your day's meticulous work, a record etched into the very fabric of your livelihood. You examine the small collection of empty containers. The glass vials that held scent samples are set out carefully. You brush away any last specks of fallen spice dust from the polished bronze scales. You check the counterweights, ensuring they rest perfectly centered and untouched by moisture or grit. These tools, simple in their design, represent a profound dedication to measured exchange. Their immaculate condition is an extension of your personal reputation. The air now carries the distinct scent of cooling charcoal mixing with drying wood smoke from cooking fires starting up in the residential areas nearby. It is a warming smell, suggesting that although the port's commercial breath has paused, life itself is merely pausing for the night, ready to resume its rhythm when the sun calls it back. You move along the market aisle again, not with urgency, but with the deliberate pace of someone conducting a final survey. You are seeking anything left behind, any stray item that might have slipped from an overburdened porter or been carelessly discarded by a rushing buyer. A small shard of dried leaf here, a few scattered peppercorns there. You feel the humidity pressing close to your skin, a thick, warm blanket woven with salt air and human breath. You notice how even under this humid pressure, the deep, satisfying weight of the unsold spices remains reliable, a solid promise stored in sacks beneath your fingertips. This systematic collection is more than just tidiness. It is a profound acknowledgement of order within chaos. It is you mentally closing the chapter on today's interactions, ensuring that nothing required for tomorrow's delicate calculation has been lost to the indifferent currents or the night's inevitable washings. The routine itself becomes meditative, grounding your existence in dependable motion. As you finally stand up, stretching slightly against the coolness of the cooling air, you look out towards the mouth of the port where the last sliver of orange light is fading into twilight blue. You take a deep breath that draws in the whole composite atmosphere, the spices mixed with the sewage, the sweet resin mixing with the salt rot, the metallic scent overlaid by wood smoke. It is the unique fragrance signature of Malacca at dusk. The smell of intense commerce settling down to prepare for renewal. Your day's work has been exhaustive, and this lingering moment of sensory absorption allows you to quietly process not only what was sold, but the entire passing performance of your life within the mercantile current. The sun has dipped below the horizon now, pulling the last streaks of orange and mauve from the sky above the straits. You have navigated away from the main flow of the quayside, through narrow lanes that smell faintly of lime wash and damp refuse. The great clamor of Malacca's trade day is receding with the tide, leaving behind a profound stillness. You find your small dwelling tucked close to the wharves, built of dark wood and woven rattan, smelling richly of coconut oil and sea salt. Shedding the remnants of the day, the dust from your knees, the slight ache in your shoulders, you finally sink onto a low stool near the open vent that allows the humid night air to circulate. You do not immediately settle into rest. Instead, you move toward the corner where your samples are kept. They are not for sale tonight. They are merely representatives of what was exchanged today and what travels across the sea tomorrow. You gently pick up a handful of cloves. They are dark brown, almost black in the dim light filtering through the lattice window. Each one is heavy, surprisingly solid, retaining the dense perfume of its origin. You lift them to your nose, taking slow, deep breaths, letting the sharp, cloying scent open fully into your lungs. The aroma reminds you instantly of distant volcanic soil and tropical heat. Next, you retrieve a small pile of dried cinnamon sticks. They are brittle, curled slightly at the edges, the color of aged rust. You run a thumb over the rough surface of one stick. It feels dry and almost dusty, a texture vastly different from the plump weight of the clove bud beside it. Cinnamon speaks of distant Asian forests, of slow growth under tropical sun. These objects seem impossibly small for the sheer distance they have traveled. You consider where these things came from. They did not spring up here in Malacca. They were cultivated on islands you likely never saw, islands passed by larger carracks years ago, known only through whispered sailor lore and meticulous maps drawn over spilled rum. Their journey was long, governed by monsoons and the unpredictable whims of wind currents. Your role is to be a quiet point of arrival and departure, the ritualistic hinge upon which great maritime exchange turns. The air in your room is thick and warm, saturated with the mingled smells of wood smoke from the cooking fires nearby, the deep brine of the ocean that breathes just beyond your doorstep, and the faint, lingering ghosts of the spices themselves. You sit quietly for a time, letting these disparate scents merge, the metallic tang of salt mixing with the earthy sweetness of cinnamon, underlined by the sharp perfume of clove. You notice the moonlight beginning to cast shifting patterns across the packed earth floor. The light is soft and indirect, illuminating only what it touches. It catches the slight sheen on your bronze scales, polished smooth from years of diligent use. Those scales are not merely instruments. They are extensions of your reputation, a physical commitment to honesty that must withstand the scrutiny of every captain, mandarin, and porter's chief. You gently arrange your samples into a small wooden bowl. They sit together, the uniform hardness of nutmeg seed, speckled with dark markings, the elegant curl of cinnamon, the dense bloom of clove. They are separated by their origins, yet united by this moment, resting in the quiet care of your hand. You contemplate the network these goods represent, the lines drawn on maps that link your small corner of Malacca to distant jungles and unseen harbors. The history contained within these few grams is vast. It speaks of empires rising and falling, of ships battling typhoons, of scholars charting invisible trade routes, and of everyday men like yourself whose steady hands ensured the cargo arrived in perfect measure. You think of the meticulous labor required for every stage, the careful plucking of buds by hand on a humid island plantation, the arduous journey through narrow river mouths before reaching the Great Bay, and finally, the moment they are brought to this quay, mixed into the flow of human exchange. Your eyes follow the rhythmic movement of the water against the pilings. It is slow, inexorable breathing of the sea. The steady lap-lap sound acts as a natural metronome for your thoughts, urging them toward a calm cadence. You reflect on how essential this rhythm, the routine assessment and reliable handling of goods, is to the whole grand mechanism of global trade. If you were careless with a measurement, if your scales wavered or your knowledge proved shallow, not only would you lose coin, but more profoundly, you would risk something far harder to replace: trust. The realization settles gently over you. This is the enduring truth of Malacca's commerce. It is built less on the might of cannons than on the precision of a merchant's assessment and the solid reputation that comes from never compromising quality or measurement. You draw a deep breath, letting it expand slowly into your chest, tasting the mingled salt and spice on your tongue. You pick up a cinnamon stick again, turning it over in your fingers until the moonlight glints off its curved surface. Its slight warmth seems to penetrate your skin, bringing with it memories of sunshine and tropical breezes hundreds of miles away. You do not need to recount the journey. You only need to hold the weight of the past within these quiet samples. The day's negotiation, the clatter of coins, the hurried whispers in multiple tongues, it all seems filtered through this calm moment now. It settles into a continuous background hum, understood and accepted. The goods are at rest, for now. They wait patiently, poised between your stewardship and the next favorable monsoon wind that will carry them out once more into the great unknown. You sit with them, surrounded by the quiet scent of potential wealth and deeply rooted history, allowing the rhythm of the port night to slow you down until you too achieve a deep, measured repose. The last light of the moon has retreated from the water, leaving the docks submerged in a deep, humid quiet. You stand amidst the remnants of the day's commerce. The air feels thicker now, scented equally by the sweetness of spent spices and the more earthy smell of cooling mangrove wood. Your routine insists upon order, and this evening cleansing is an essential part of maintaining your small world right here on the quay. You begin by systematically gathering the remnants of your stall. Small empty sacks are gathered up, their rough burlap fibers brushing against your skin. You observe the pattern of scattered husks, the tiny remains of shells or dried spice debris, and methodically sweep them into a wooden pail. The sound of the broom moving across the packed earth is soft and rhythmic, almost musical in the sudden stillness. The cleaning process begins with your tools. Your bronze scales, which were polished so fiercely at dawn, are now wiped down again. You notice faint streaks of turmeric stain or deep orange clove residue clinging to the brass balance arms. You treat each piece carefully, understanding that their clean readiness dictates the accuracy and trustworthiness of your word tomorrow. You pick up the small coconut shell mortar used for testing blends. Its surface is sticky with residual resins, perhaps a touch of smoky Indonesian frankincense or a sweeter patchouli. Running your thumb over its curves, you feel the coolness of the polished shell against your skin. You scrape out any remaining particulate matter, rinsing it slowly in a basin of fresh, brackish water until the runoff is clear. These simple acts of cleaning are more than mere upkeep. They are rituals that settle the day's lingering energy. Each rinsed tool represents another transaction successfully measured, another agreement honored. They symbolize the reliability of your life here on Malacca's bustling edge. You move to arrange the remaining sample goods. The small, contained piles of cloves, nutmeg shards, and cinnamon quills look different under the oil lamp's soft glow than they did when handled hours ago under the harsh midday sun. Some pieces reflect light with a dark sheen, others absorb it into their woody textures. You gently sift through a handful of whole cloves. You observe how the dried petals curve slightly, retaining the memory of the flower's initial vibrant scent. The faint, sharp oil released as they are disturbed speaks not only of their nature, but also of their journey. The distant plantation they left many weeks ago, carried by monsoon winds and human hands. A profound silence settles over the narrow passage between your stall and the wharves beyond. This quiet is unusual for a port that lived and breathed with such fervent energy today. You listen closely. Sometimes the faint slosh of water against pilings, perhaps the distant rhythmic call of a boatman, or the barely audible lapping of waves under the piers. Your gaze drifts toward the main trading docks. The lights are few now. Only a handful of oil lamps glow in staggered intervals, casting warm pools of yellow light onto otherwise cooling stone pathways. You note how many crates remain stacked, empty ones beside full ones, waiting for tomorrow's labor to reorganize them. The humidity begins to seep into your clothes and bones, carrying with it the amalgamation of all the day's scents. Salt spray mixed with sweat, overlaid by the persistent background notes of drying spices, diesel fuel residue from distant boats, and the undeniable muskiness of a tropical evening. It is a complex perfume that only Malacca can create. You sit down on a low wooden stool near your ledger, keeping it dry from any drips. You do not write today. Writing requires more focus, more clarity, than what you feel in this soft twilight state. Instead, you trace the smooth, worn leather surface of the book with one finger. This ledger holds the memory of your reputation, the confirmed weights, the agreed prices, and the names of the captains who trusted your careful hands. The weight of maintaining this reputation feels substantial, heavier even than the largest cargo crate stacked beside you. It is built entirely on meticulousness, the trust given to you by a Mandarin from Canton or an Arab merchant from Hormuz is not easily gained. It must be re-earned every single day through unwavering competence. Thinking of your own role brings a quiet satisfaction. You are not commanding armies, nor issuing royal decrees. Your power is localized and deeply practical. The ability to assess quality by scent and touch, to measure weight with flawless precision, and to manage conflicting interests with measured patience. This specialized knowledge allows you to stand at the nexus point of global desire. You rise slowly from the stool, stretching your back muscles that have been held straight in concentration all day. A mild fatigue settles over you now, the deep kind of exhaustion that follows focused mental effort rather than physical labor. It is a gentle ache in the joints and the mind alike. You begin to contemplate sleep not as an end, but as another form of necessary preparation. As you settle your belongings near your modest sleeping mat against the wall, you observe the interplay between natural light and artificial lamplight across the nearby merchant stalls. The darkness is deep enough now to mask details, yet still retains the faint gleam on wet stone. You think about the cycle, the clamor of morning negotiations giving way to the reflective quiet of evening preparation, the methodical chaos yielding to the absolute stillness required for true rest. You breathe deeply, deliberately drawing in the cool, salty air, and then exhaling slowly, letting it carry away the accumulated tension of a full day's trade. The sounds that guide you now are softer than any sound heard at dawn. The slight shift of your own sandals on the cooling stone, the gentle clinking as a distant tide washes past the pilings. You settle into the rhythm of the place, accepting its humdrum beauty and the relentless, quiet demand for preparation. Tomorrow, the cycles will restart. You must be ready to receive the monsoon winds and the eager porters once more, guarding your knowledge and your reputation like precious spices themselves. Allowing yourself this